In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the artist and activist Alice Merrill Horne was a key figurehead in establishing the visual culture of turn of the century Mormonism in Utah. Across the pond, in London and Paris, the painter James Abbott McNeill Whistler was also a formidable cultural force. His innovative approach to art helped turn the tide towards modernism. This paper demonstrates how Horne likely looked to Whistler for inspiration as she developed and described the burgeoning visual culture of early Mormon Utah, and as she supported the careers of Utah artists like Mary Teasdale and Lee Green Richards. Specifically, I will explore how Whistler's art and ideology seemingly inspired Horne's enthusiastic interest in the aesthetics of harmony. Alice Merrill Horne and James Abbott McNeill Whistler are two individuals whose ambitions, personalities, cultural influence, and countless roles in their respective communities are impossible to simply sum up. Even their names take up a lot of space. Horne is, in many ways, the mother of art and aesthetics in Mormon Utah. Horne studied at the Art Institute of Chicago, served in important political and church leadership positions in Utah, and successfully advocated for the accessibility of art in church, schools, homes, and public spaces. She was elected to the Utah State House of Representatives and, while there, enacted a bill to create a state art institute and state art collection. Horne was no doubt a part of why Utah artists, including many women, received financial support from the Mormon Church to pursue education in progressive art centers like Paris. She published Devotees and Their Shrines, a handbook of Utah art, and countless other writings, from Mormon Relief Society curricula to public lectures. Alice Merrill Horne passionately believed in the power of art to strengthen her community and her faith, and she dedicated her life to manifesting her vision. The many writings of Alice Merrill Horne frequently discuss the art and ideas of James Whistler, seemingly more so than any other internationally famous artist from Horne's lifetime. Whistler, an American by birth, made a name for himself in 19th century Europe for a daring approach to art that, depending on who you were, you either found very compelling or very controversial. If you don't already know Whistler for his long-standing influence on Western art, his 10 o'clock lecture, or various anecdotes about his notorious public persona, you will almost certainly know him for his famous portrait of his mother, which is formally titled Arrangement in Gray and Black. Like this portrait, most of Whistler's paintings are named not for their apparent subjects, but with musical terms like arrangement, nocturne, or harmony. Whistler was a leader of the aesthetic movement in Britain, which prized the notion of art for art's sake. Whistler believed that, much like music without lyrics, visual art could primarily serve the function of provoking the senses and evoking emotion, and it needn't tell a story, teach a lesson, or instill any morals at all. It was perhaps thanks to Alice Merrill Horne's influence as a tastemaker that art, aesthetics, and even James Whistler himself were popular topics of public discussion in turn of the century Utah. These are just a handful of excerpts from Utah print archives that feature local writings referencing Whistler and his work, including the Salt Lake City newspaper The Broad Axe, as well as the Mormon Church's Young Woman's Journal and Relief Society magazine. Dispatches from other cities about the art world, dozens of which feature Whistler, were also frequently distributed by newspapers across Utah, and not just the capital of Salt Lake City. They include notice of Whistler's exhibitions, critical reviews of his work, and even gossip about his bohemian lifestyle. Clearly, James Whistler, among many other contemporaneous art topics, were on the minds not just of artists and art enthusiasts, but the general public in Utah too. Alice Merrill Horne knew a lot about art history and the contemporary art world. She personally knew and supported Utah artists who studied with renowned academicians like Bouguereau in Paris, Monet at Giverny, and so on. But Horne was especially enchanted by Whistler. She considered him an ideal example for aspiring Utah artists. In fact, Horne borrowed a lot of rhetoric straight from Whistler as she formed and shared her own ideas about what defined Utah art. One of the most prominent themes in both Whistler's ideology and in Horne's own application of it is the concept of harmony. Like Whistler, Horne consistently used the word harmony in her writings. She believed harmony was something that all people could and should aspire towards, especially through art. According to Horne, harmony was among the highest critical compliments she could give to an artist. A close examination of the artists and particular works of art that Horne declared to have achieved harmony reveals a fascinating common thread: resemblance to the aesthetics and reference to the ideas of Whistler. In 1914, Horne published the book Devotees and Their Shrines, a Handbook of Utah Art. In it, she extensively quotes Whistler's own famous manifesto, the 10 o'clock lecture, which was originally delivered as a speech in London in 1885. Both of these publications helped lay the foundations for their respective visual cultures, and notably, both publications explore a concept that I will refer to as the aesthetics of harmony. In the 10 o'clock lecture, Whistler proclaimed, "Nature contains the elements of color and form of all pictures, but the artist is born to pick and choose these elements, that the result may be beautiful, as the musician gathers his notes and forms his chords to bring forth from chaos glorious harmony." In addition to quoting this exact Whistler passage in her own book, Horne wrote, "The author can in the same sentence fly from the flower on the riverbank to the most distant peak. Sunshine and cloud effects, rainbows and lightning's flash may be mentioned in one breath. Not so the painted picture. Its story is the harmony of a single moment of time. The great artist chooses that subject and that moment best suited to his vehicle of self-expression." Here, both writers assert the superiority of harmony in art. Whistler and Horne both believed in their own ways that harmony represented an ideal in art and aesthetics. The harmonization of all the formal components of a painting into one aesthetic whole was the ultimate artistic achievement. More important even than the artist's selection of a worthy subject, a showcase of their academic skill, or their inclusion of good morals or clear narratives. As a vocal proponent of art for art's sake, Whistler was not considering harmony through the lens of religion. But for Horne, a devout Mormon, the notion of harmony would have had spiritual significance. For one, harmony suggests Zion, a state of being where a diverse group of people can come together with one heart and one mind, which was an important spiritual concept amongst the Mormon pioneers who settled in Utah. In Devotees and Their Shrines, Alice Merrill Horne included biographies of Utah artists. She wrote most extensively about the artists who, in her view, achieved harmony in their work. There are several, but I will be focusing my discussion on two of these artists. Mary Teasdale, who traveled from Salt Lake City to Paris to personally study in Whistler's studio, and Lee Green Richards, who also traveled to Paris and London and became one of Utah's premier portrait painters. Mary Teasdale was one of several American students in James Whistler's unconventional Parisian studio, which was an aesthetic experience in itself. As Teasdale's mentor, Horne was interested in every detail she could spare about her time with Whistler. Horne wrote of Teasdale's education, "When Mr. Whistler came from England to Paris, he introduced an innovation in studio life. A quaint old house was obtained, the walls were tinted, and harmonious draperies and furnishings were placed to make an artistic effect. Miss Teasdale became a pupil there and enjoyed it all fully." Mary Teasdale became the first Utah woman to exhibit work in the prestigious Paris Salon, and she enjoyed a successful career upon returning home. Teasdale gave several public lectures in Utah about her experiences abroad, many of which focused on Whistler, and published writings about art, some of which touch on the topic of harmony. Horne frequently referenced Teasdale as one of the most exemplary artists in Utah. History tends to remember Teasdale as a Utah impressionist, which is in many ways accurate, but Horne did not exclusively categorize Teasdale as such. Horne wrote, "Miss Teasdale's greatest quality is a subtle feeling for composition in which none of the artists overtake her. This and a refined sense of tone, a sensitive individuality, and a tender spiritual understanding of harmony are to be found in her work." Mary Teasdale's painting titled Seascape demonstrates what Horne meant about Teasdale's subtle feeling for composition, refined sense of tone, and spiritual understanding of harmony. Horne's observations arguably recall Whistler's aestheticism more than they do the quintessential elements of French Impressionism. In this painting, Teasdale utilized a monotonous array of toned-down, earthy colors, loose, thick brushstrokes, and simplified forms that daringly approach abstraction. The result is an aesthetic, expressive experience of a seascape rather than a strictly observational or instructive one. Teasdale's seascape is visually and thematically reminiscent of James Whistler's famous series of waterscapes that he called nocturnes. The nocturnes were inspired by Whistler's frequent forays into London's River Thames by night. The dense industrial haze and shimmering city lights inspired Whistler to flatten visual planes, desaturate colors, and abstract forms and figures. Like Teasdale's seascape, Whistler's nocturne suggests the artist's primary intention to craft a harmony of the painting's aesthetic components. Alice Merrill Horne, when writing about Teasdale's education, described how Teasdale practiced painting night scenes, an interest that certainly traces back to her time in Whistler's studio, and perhaps also to her mentor's favoritism of Whistler and his focus on aesthetic harmony. In any case, the details Horne chose to include when writing about Utah artists like Teasdale indicate the utmost respect for Whistler's influence. Lee Green Richards is the second Utah artist I will discuss in relation to Alice Merrill Horne, James Whistler, and the aesthetics of harmony. Richards was a successful artist in many genres, but he became famous during his lifetime for painting portraits of Mormon church leaders and other significant cultural figures in Utah. You might notice that his portrait of Bathsheba Smith, pictured in the center, strongly resembles the austere, flat composition and tonal coloration of Whistler's mother. Like Mary Teasdale, Richards studied art in Paris and exhibited work in the Paris Salon, where he was the first Utah artist to earn an honorable mention. Richards also served as a Mormon missionary in England in the 1890s, during which he immersed himself in London's art scene. Viewing British portraits in person especially influenced Richards' pursuit of portrait painting back home in Utah. Alice Merrill Horne wrote about her perspective of Richards' trajectory as a painter. She specifically noted that as his career progressed, he grew less interested in light, glowing, brilliant colors, and instead began to favor gray schemes and tonal qualities rather than decided pure colors. Horne continued, such themes as twilight, gray days, and moonlight appealed strongly to him. She also wrote that Richards possessed a born gift to discover harmonies and the instinct of selection. There are many ways in which Lee Green Richards seems to have been inspired by James Whistler, even down to Richards' reputation for wearing smocks that were made to match his studio. Perhaps Horne's love of Whistler inspired Richards. Indeed, Horne's highest compliments of Lee Green Richards over the years, which carried significant weight in the Utah art scene, were decidedly Whistler-esque. Horne often described her favorite Richards portraits with phrases like a poem in tone or a charming scheme of black and white, clearly echoing Whistler's approach to naming his own paintings, which emphasized the harmony of aesthetic components over subject matter. Horne was especially drawn to Richards' loosely rendered full-length portraits, which, again, recall Whistler's portraits. Here, the center portrait is Whistler's, while the left and right paintings are by Richards. Both artists intentionally simplified their compositions by flattening perspective, selecting complementary decorative objects and textures, and using analogous tones to emphasize the harmony of aesthetics components just as much as, or perhaps even more than, the identity of the subject. It follows that, in the words of Horne, Richards' most Whistler-esque portraits are the ones she considered to be so completely in harmony. Another fascinating note about Lee Green Richards is that on non-commissioned portraits, he signed not just with his name, but with a monogram design that integrated his initials into the figure of a turtle. This is a direct copy of James Whistler, who famously signed his works with an ever-evolving butterfly insignia that originated as a stylized version of his initials. He did this both to stand out from the crowd and to more holistically harmonize every component of his paintings into an aesthetic whole. There is a clear connection between James Whistler and the art of early Mormon Utah, as established and encouraged by Alice Merrill Horne. Based on the philosophies Horne espoused and preached, and the specific artworks and artistic qualities she praised in her writing, Horne believed that Utah artists like Richards and Teasdale should foremost strive for harmony in their work, not necessarily as a vehicle for a moral or spiritual narrative, but as an aesthetic and even spiritual value in its own right. Horne clearly believed Whistler best exemplified this noblest of pursuits. Alice Merrill Horne's teachings on harmony are not limited to the two Utah artists discussed here. In fact, her ideas on the topic are not even limited to the realm of fine art. She fervently applied this interest in the aesthetics of harmony everywhere she could, from homemaking to religious instruction to higher education. In an essay aptly titled Harmony, Alice Merrill Horne proclaimed, "A part of God's light is reflected whenever harmony is produced. Only the highest minds produce harmony, whether it be in music, art, or in the home. Harmony is master." To conclude, Alice Merrill Horne embraced the concept of harmony as she took on the daunting role of documenting and developing the aesthetic culture of Mormonism in turn of the century Utah. She clearly looked to James Whistler's art and rhetoric as she fleshed out her ideas, asserted her leadership, and imbued Utah art with the cultural significance and global art world authority that she knew it deserved.